Well, hey there guys, I'm Axel the Beast, and this is the Curiosity Shop, the ZeldaEngine.net video mailbag where I answer your Zelda questions. Our first question comes from Ayano Keiko. I feel like Zelda fans are very critical about each game in the franchise. For example, I see a lot of criticism involving the weapon durability system in Breath of the Wild, and I personally feel like the odd one out with this opinion because I love the durability system and what it brings to the combat and gameplay. Is there anything about the series that you feel is too harshly criticized? In all seriousness, though, I think this is based on the old standby of my favorite Zelda game is the one that came out when I was 12 type situation, and it's just based on the fact that so many of the games are different. I mean, there are some with, you know, mostly similarities, but just small differences, but then there's ones that are very different in one way or another. And I think it's things like that that cause the big divides between which Zelda games are everyone's favorites, and then, of course, them wanting more of the games in the series to be like them, even though the series differs so much from game to game. I think that in some ways that's probably part of why the series has such a big fan base to begin with. Skittlenator asks, would you like to see Skyward Sword get an HD remake? If so, would you like to see motion controls, basic controller settings, or both? Not especially. I've been over this with remakes. I'm just not too into the idea of spending development time on remaking things. However, you know, if it was just they upscaled it into HD without changing much, or just did a light touch-up of the graphics and it's mostly just a re-release, then fine, I guess. Which might make you assume that my answer would be the motion controls, but actually I think it's very easy to implement systems that approximate the motion controls. They've been done in, honestly, a lot of games in the past, even as back as the origin of the dual analog controllers. You just have one analog stick indicate the directions of the sword, and there's other things in the game that require, you know, controls, but you can map them to, you know, joysticks, aiming, and things like that. I don't know, I think it would be easy to translate over, and they might as well put it in for the people that complain about it, so we can get past the controller argument with Skyward Sword and just talk about the game for once, you know? I feel like we always get into controller stuff every time. All the time. Alright, Matt asks a slightly different question about an HD Skyward Sword remake. Despite having some great quality, Skyward Sword is my least favorite 3D Zelda game due to issues like the motion controls not always working as expected and the repeated boss fight. If it would ever get the treatment that the Wind Waker got with its HD re-release, what would you expect/want changed? So, okay, so maybe we're on opposite ends of the spectrum here. I mean, we obviously are a little, because Skyward Sword is my favorite Zelda game, barring Breath of the Wild, but I suspect we may be in another way, because the Wind Waker is my least favorite. So, I don't know how you feel about it, obviously, but for me, the Wind Waker has so many like fundamental design problems that and I mean, I talked about this last time. A lot of the changes in the Wind Waker HD felt like band-aids to problems that they didn't really solve entirely. So, like, I think the overworld's awkwardly designed, so making the sailing faster didn't really fix that. I think that, I mean, I'm not big on remakes. I think the games that you should remake, you should spend time developing new games, not trying to touch up old ones. That's my philosophy in general, and I think it applies to video games too. And I feel like the only ones you try to touch up are ones that have, like, significant failures and some real potential that was never reached. And I do think the Wind Waker could qualify, but I also think that at the same time, I don't think the remake fixed any of the problems. It just, you know, improved them a little bit. And I feel like Skyward Sword, as much as I love the game, has a bunch of big problems, and particularly, like, game structure, overworld structure stuff. It could have been a lot more open than it was, like, monumentally more open than it was, and I think it's a huge missed opportunity for it to not be. So I think that if they were going to remake Skyward Sword, and maybe it could justify a remake, although I think it's strong enough on its own that I don't really particularly want it, but maybe for some other people, I feel like it would need a bigger one. One that changes overworld structure stuff, like, substantially. As for the motion controls, they worked fine for me. Obviously, they didn't for some people. I still suspect some of that is just how difficult it is to figure out how to use them, how to figure out the correct inputs, but maybe some people had interference, so, you know, they could improve that. I don't know. Yeah. Does that count as an overly harsh opinion for one of my favorite games? Idiot asks, and I didn't give him that name. That's the name he put on here. Do you think the downfall timeline is a result of Link jumping back and forth during Ocarina of Time? As such, could he have created an alternate timeline where he fails because of changing something in the past that has a butterfly effect? You know, maybe, but that's not the kind of thing that's very easy to swallow unless it was actually in the game. Granted, maybe this is the reason I didn't like the timeline split idea when I first heard it. The timeline split, in general, isn't really in Ocarina of Time. It's depicted you know, through the differences between the Wind Waker and Twilight Princess and Nintendo's confirmation of it in the, you know, dialogue surrounding Twilight Princess by the developers. But with regards to the downfall timeline, to me it's clearly something that they just made up when they were trying to make an official timeline, decided to go with the timeline split stuff, and then we're looking and just didn't like where some of the games would fit on those timelines, so they just decided to make a new one. It's just a what if. It's just what if Link failed while he fought Ganon. There's nothing really else to it. It's not part of the game. It's not in Ocarina of Time. Even less than the child and adult timeline split. It's not even part of like the continual story. It's just a what if. You know what I mean? That's all there is to it, unfortunately. Mr. JD asks, what do you think happened to the Hero of Winds in between Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks? Some people think he died in the war against Malladus. Do you think that happened, or did he simply die of old age? This, you know, falls under the lines of something that's just not shown at all or talked about. So, you know, for the average Zelda fan, it means, okay, what happened there then? Let's try to come up with an idea. And for me, it's usually just like, I don't care. Not always, but in this case, yes, because I don't care about Link. He doesn't matter. So, yeah, I feel like the intro of Spirit Tracks was supposed to be long before, you know, the events of the game, like long before. So I kind of don't feel... I mean, it's been a while since I played the game, so maybe I'm not remembering something correctly, but I'm pretty sure that Malladus, the whole thing with Malladus was a long time ago, probably before New Hyrule was settled, because it was a war between demons and spirits. It was not necessarily between demons and people. So, I don't know. I don't see that being that possible. I figure this is just, you know, something happened to the Link. Probably he lived out his days. Blah, blah, blah. Whatnot. I don't know. That's all I got. We don't know, so, you know, who cares about Link? He's just the Link. Who cares about the Link? I care about me. And the game. We got to see what happened to Tetra. That's all that matters. Dualmark asks, so in 2016, Miyamoto revealed that there were plans for a Sheik spinoff, but nothing ever came of it. Maybe someday we'll get it, but until then, what do you think a Sheik game would be like? Would it be set before the adult portion of Ocarina of Time, or after as a follow-up? What kind of gameplay would you like? In general, how do you feel about a Rogue One kind of game for the series? Well, in general, I'm big on remakes. Whoa. No, I'm big on spin-offs. I hate remakes. Yeah, I'm big on spin-offs. I feel like, you know, there's the main series, and it usually should stick to how it is, but when you got spin-offs, you can really play around with the world and the characters and just do all kinds of things, all kinds of gameplay, and whatnot. And I feel like, you know, that quote actually, as I understand it, wasn't necessarily that they were planning to make it. They just kicked around the idea a little bit. It was more like you could seriously consider it in the future. But that's that vague kind of line they drop all the time. So I don't know about that. You know, I'm not big on Sheik as a character, primarily because I don't consider Sheik a character. It's an alias, you know? But yeah, you know... a ninja game, which is what I feel like it would be. I feel like any game with Sheik where it just plays as a Zelda game, in the traditional sense, would be kind of lame, but as a stealthier, you know, more like, you know, assassin-oriented Zelda game, that could be kind of interesting. And, as for where it would be set, I feel like after the Adult Link portion would be unlikely, because at that point Zelda can just take charge of the kingdom again and not have to, you know, put the royal lives at risk type situation. I feel like it would have to be before, which is kind of why I'm not crazy about the idea, simply because, I don't know, like, what's the, what are you going to tell? Oh, I hit around for a while and trained as a ninja. Like, it would be a training the game? I don't know. I don't see what they could, I mean, it's Zelda. They could come up with anything they want, I guess. They do that all the time anyway. See Breath of the Wild and the futuristic stuff, so. And Skyward Sword. Jack asks, how would you feel about a steampunk Zelda? Maybe primitive guns instead of a bow, etc. So, okay, steampunk, I think, if it wasn't taken too far, I think would be a reasonable fit for the series. Certainly steampunk elements, and we've seen a few with the trains and stuff. Certainly I think it would actually have been a better fit than the kind of weird futuristic stuff they're going with, at least if it were as well implemented and, you know, carefully designed as the futuristic stuff is. Because the futuristic stuff does work in Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild more than I would have thought. But I don't know, like, I think it's an odd direction. I think the steampunk direction could have fit better. as for the guns thing, yeah, I did a whole video on this way back about that argument that guns could work in Zelda, you know, primitive muskets, things like that. They could replace the bow, but they could also serve as an alternative weapon. I always had the idea of guns as a higher power, slower to fire kind of thing, different than the bow and arrow. So, I don't know, there's a lot of ways they could go with that, and there's all kinds of other things they could do with it, too. Hunter asks, in your opinion, what are your favorite Zelda games in each of the following categories? Story, dungeons, combat, and music. So, and this is going to be just so typical. Story, pretty much Skyward Sword. For, what was it, dungeons? Definitely Skyward Sword. You know, okay, story is actually more like a tie between Skyward Sword and Majora's Mask, I guess, in their own different ways. I can't comment on Breath of the Wild yet. I think A Link Between Worlds gets a high third kind of situation because of some of what goes on in that game. But you know, for dungeons, it's a definite Skyward Sword. For combat, that's an interesting question. I like some stuff in Skyward Sword. I like some stuff in Twilight Princess. I like some stuff in Breath of the Wild. I don't think any Zelda game has wowed me with combat, though. But there's definitely some high points to a lot of those games, I would say. As for music, it's Skyward Sword. You can kind of see why it's my favorite game now, huh? But how about you guys? You know, maybe you guys will have some more diverse answers than me, huh? As for whys and whatnot, you know, Skyward Sword just had a lot of cool characterization and interesting plot threads. You know, Majora's Mask is just interesting and has so many side characters and whatnot. You know, the dungeons in Skyward Sword I just thought were brilliant in a lot of ways. You know, the combat, well, there's just cool points to the combat in all those games. As for the music, it's Skyward Sword. JP asks, which game is your favorite Link and Zelda character designs? Well, I think I've touched on this now. Link sucks. I don't know. I've never been big on Link. What Link has my favorite character design? I don't know. Breath of the Wild, because I can have whatever character design I want? I don't know. I guess if I had to pick a Link design, I'd probably pick the Wind Waker's, even though that's not my favorite art style, just because he looks so fun. He has the, like, cat-like eyes and whatnot. I don't know. Probably Wind Waker Link, I guess. I don't know. I'm not big on this one. Link's never been my favorite character. As for Zelda, wait for it. She's just so cute, you know? This is great. I like Skyward Sword Zelda a lot. Alright guys, that's it for this time. And asking Zelda questions is half the battle. But I'll take care of the rest if you send them to the contact information in the description. And I'll see you guys later. Good enough.